Emor begins with maybe something that is unusual in the Torah, but it doesn't, I think, feel unusual to most of us. It's about the priesthood. The thing about the temple was that it could never become impure. Our tradition did whatever it could to put a fence around the temple so that nothing that had touched impurity could get into the Holy of Holies, that space in which God landed into. So the priests in our tradition, the Kohanim, they lived like this. They didn't go anywhere that you could find impurity. They didn't go into cemeteries. Priests in our tradition could not go to funerals. Can you imagine not going to the funeral of a beloved cousin because you might take the impurity of death with you back into the temple? This week's Parsha comes to say there's actually a time in which priests can become impure. They can become impure when they have to bury their loved ones, their immediate loved ones, their family, brothers, sisters, parents, kids. Which is to say, no matter how sacred a space is in our tradition, there will always be a way for people to bury those who are closest to them. You may even become impure. You may break one law of the Torah for the sake of your love, for the sake of the obligation to lay people to rest. Today was the tale of two funerals. It's the tale of two funerals, at least for Lauren and I. As she told you earlier, we laid to rest this morning one of Addis Israel's greats, Erwin Lebo. And Erwin was special to us. He was a mentor for us. He was a teacher for us. But most of all, he was there for us in moments in which we thought we were going to get slammed by people for what we would say from the pulpit. Erwin would send an email. Erwin, whose bar mitzvah was in 1939. Like when we gave a sermon after George Floyd was murdered by a police officer, it was Erwin who sent us an email saying, somehow you made a 5,000-year-old Torah relevant in this very moment. It was Erwin who said, wow, I'm so grateful that my rabbis acknowledge that Jews don't come in only one color. It was Erwin who said, Rabbi Holtzblatt, when you speak about the trans community, you uplift the Torah in ways that I never thought were possible. That was Erwin Lebo for us, 95 years old. It was one of the most beautiful funerals we have ever been to. And we were standing under the tree that sheltered Joyce Stern when our other teacher, Michael Stern, was buried. It was a remarkable morning at exactly the same time that we were burying Erwin Lebo in what was the most loving funeral we have seen in quite some time. Shireen Abu Akleh, a Palestinian journalist, was being buried in Jerusalem. And as her casket was being held through the streets, the people carrying her casket were being beaten by clubs from Israeli police officers. Now, before your heart starts beating, and I would like you to just breathe right now, breathe. There may be a gigantic context to this story, and I'm not about to share it because I'm not going to talk about this story. It's much bigger than this story. But we as Jews understand that the most sacred obligation in our tradition, the Met Mitzvah, the burial of somebody, that's it. It trumps every other commandment in the Torah. And so, no matter the context, when we see a casket almost fall to the ground, our hearts stop, regardless of who is inside of that casket, and we mourn. And here is what we mourn. What we mourn is the fact that we are losing our humanity. We as a world are losing our humanity. In the past month, 20 Israelis have been killed by terrorist attacks. In the past month, settlements have expanded and outposts have expanded. In the past month, communities, Palestinian communities who have lived in the land of Israel for generations have been displaced from their homes. In the past months, college campuses on the United States have had their newspapers write ridiculously unaware articles about BDS. Not that somebody couldn't make a reasonable claim, but it hasn't been made in a college newspaper. We are literally arguing with each other to the point in which our humanity is being so diminished that a casket can fall in the streets of Jerusalem. And that's just across the world. That's just across the world. Because here in this country, Lauren and I will be at the Supreme Court on Tuesday morning to march with the Jewish community on behalf of, I don't know, maybe a woman having agency over her own body. And while we're there, we'll probably scream a little bit about the fact that in Tennessee and Missouri and Louisiana and Alabama, state legislators want to tell trans kids, you are not worthy of being the human that you actually know you are. We are watching humanity be diminished each and every day. And so whether it's here or whether it's in Israel, and whether it's an Israeli or a Palestinian, Israelis or Palestinians, caskets are falling. And it's not just Shireen Abu Akleh's casket. Caskets are falling all over the place, and nobody is receiving the dignity that they deserve. And so we can fight. Last week, Kadoshim Tehiyu, I stood up in front of the congregation and I said, literally, we're in the middle of the Torah. I said literally a lot. We are in the middle of the Torah. And what the middle of the Torah in Vayikra tells us is be holy. And there is love, and there is justice, and there is truth. And Kadoshim Tehiyu, you shall be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy, means you must strive for a society in which there is love and justice and truth. And we are swimming further and further away precisely because when we look at another human being, we cannot see their humanity. And I today, as we were bearing Erwin Lebo and then got into our car and opened up our phones and saw images of pallbearers being pelted by Israeli soldiers, police officers. Again, whatever the context, it's bigger than the one image, and yet the image is enough to know that our humanity is being diminished and we are allowing it to happen. And we as a Jewish community may not allow it to happen. Our role, Kadoshim Tehiyu, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Our role is to look one another in the eyes, and by look I don't mean see, I mean feel one another. Feel one another in our hearts, each of us worthy of another's love, each of us worthy of being buried in peace, each of us worthy of identifying as who we want to be, who we know ourselves to be in the world. So before you let your heartbeat go back to, he criticized Israel, or he didn't say enough in favor of this group or that group, how about we just look around the room and we understand that each of us was created in God's image, and each of us deserves to live with the agency and dignity that God wanted for us in the world. How about that? Do you need hope? Micah's hope. Micah brings Israelis and Palestinians together, teenagers. The Jerusalem Youth Choir. Many of them taught to hate early on in their lives. And he shows them that there is another way, a third way. The third way is to sing together and let love actually transcend the differences that they may experience in their lives. Do you need hope? Here's hope. Today was a tale of two funerals. One casket was buried with more lead than we have witnessed in quite some time, and another fell to the ground. And until two caskets can be seen as equal, we are not doing our jobs in this world. And so we can fight about who is right and who is wrong and who is the aggressor and who is the victim and who is the oppressor, and it's all true everywhere, and we can make an argument for all of it, but until we can decide that humanity actually is more important than any of those arguments that can be made, and then do something about it, until then, our work is not done. So let's commit to something bigger on Shabbat. Let's take the rest of Shabbat. Let's think about a tale of two funerals, and let's come out of Shabbat on Saturday night with a renewed energy to not up in what will be an intellectual battle between sides, but to make a case for both sides being God's side. Let's make a case for humanity, because we've lost enough already. Shabbat Shalom.